Well, it finally happened. I called it years ago, and it was only a matter of time before E3 came to an end. And it's a bittersweet ending for me because I remember, and I'm going to date myself here, I used to watch E3 before it was known as E3, and that was at the Consumer Electronics Show. And like in the 80s, it wasn't really televised. I mean, if you had cable and then basic cable, like during the mid to late 80s, they would televise this on some tech channels that were alive at the time, especially like, CNN would cover it, and basically the news would cover the Consumer Electronics Show. But I remember vividly, and it was like when, the news would show it. And this goes back all the way. I wasn't here at the time. I was only a kid, but gaming has always been part of the consumer world. And in 77, they introduced the Atari CVS. I used to have one of these in the 80s. And then like in 84 or 85, I believe, was Nintendo made the biggest splash in the history of CES. And that's when they introduced the Nintendo Entertainment System. And then you can tell that like 3 years later in 88, they introduced Tetris. And this wasn't a physical a thing. This was actually a game, a title, software. And in 90, John Madden, in 91 at CES. And then when you realize, like, moving forward in the 90s, there was this trend of these video game companies introducing software, and they realized, they're like, yo, we got to do something like this. And the reason why I mentioned Mortal Kombat is this plays a very important part in all of E3, believe it or not. But if you go back to E3, there was a gentleman by the name of Pat Farrell. And Pat Farrell was the creator of GamePro magazine, which is now defunct. And if you look at the E3 logo, not many people know this. E3, you have the yellow E and the red 3. But GamePro, I'm going to highlight it here, it has the same exact yellow and red gradient that just bleeds into each other. And like I said, Pat Farrell, the creator of GamePro magazine, he saw a big opportunity here. And the reason why I mentioned Mortal Kombat, because when Mortal Kombat was released in 91, 92, like 31 years ago, it created such a stir, especially with the fatalities. And if you read this, the series has a reputation of high levels of graphic violence, including most notably its fatalities. And that caused major controversy, which led to the ESRB. And this actually plays a big role. Because if you look at the ESRB, it was known as that's right. Years later, after Mortal Kombat made a big controversy and then Congress was all over it, and it was spearheaded by Senator Joe Lieberman, they created IDSA, which is the Interactive Digital Software Association, which is now known as the ESA, right? The ESA changed names. It went from IDSA to ESA in 2004, right? But they're like, yo, we got this. We'll take it over from here, because there was like increasing pressure from the government that they were going to like really rule this with an iron fist. And they're like, no, we can't let the government rule what we want to do. Because if you think about it, gaming was exploding in the 90s, and it was set to be the biggest, and now it is the biggest form of entertainment in the world. And so they created IDSA. Now that you had a self-regulating body that introduced the ESRB, and then Congress said, yo, that's kind of cool. It's a voluntary rating system in video games. So they had like industry pull. They had a lot of weight. If you think about it, all the bigwigs like Nintendo, there was no Sony or Microsoft just yet, but all the big companies in the video gaming front, they had a lot of pull. And Nintendo was one of the last ones to actually agree that we did need our own, or the gaming industry did need their own like exposition. And ain't it funny that Nintendo was the last one to agree, and also the first one to pull out of E3 many years ago when they started doing Nintendo Direct. So, say what you want to say about Nintendo, but they're actually, in the forefront of leading certain shit. And so the reason why I mentioned GamePro, because not only was GamePro created by Pat Farrell, but GamePro, which is owned by IDG, and IDG now is a major data collecting company, and IDG in turn own Foundry, and Foundry are the ones that own all these, Mac world, info world, computer world, PC world, you name it. And they used to own GamePro. GamePro is now defunct. But all of that, which is crazy, is owned by Blackstone. And not to be confused with BlackRock, but it almost lines up with these like multinational investment firms, private investment firms. So BlackRock, see, it's a Freudian slip. So Blackstone in turn owns IDG, which in turn owns Foundry, which then owns all these companies. So a lot of these media companies are owned by companies like Blackstone, BlackRock, which is completely separate, by the way. Again, I really want to mention that. And if you go to PC World and you scroll all the way to the bottom, you'll still see GamePro here, but then it just redirects to PCWorld.com. So then I was reading this article on Wired Magazine. This came out today. And then it goes into like the demise of what happened. And I'm reading and it says streaming killed E3. So then I go back to this article that she linked here, right? And this dates back to April of this year. And it's true. Like, a couple years ago, even before the pandemic, it wasn't even open. I think they just started opening up E3 to the public. And what happened since then? Smartphones. And so what were people doing? They were going to these events and they were posting everything on social media, and it started taking a life of its own. And they realized, with these big ass companies like Blackstone and BlackRock, again, not related, they started seeing how the world is moving towards the here and the now and the immediate and, that dopamine hit of streaming and everything in your hand. And these big tent events are just like a waste of money, and no one was really attending them anyways. And then it goes back to, why do you think, they put this here, Nintendo? Because they were at the forefront of all this. They saw this many years ago and they're like, yo, we're just going to do our own shit here. And Nintendo, that gave birth to Nintendo Direct, right? And so I'm reading this article that she linked about streaming killed E3. And she goes on to say, but thanks to streaming platforms like Twitch and YouTube, companies now have the power to deliver news to consumers in person and online simultaneously without the need for public relation firms or journalists. Nintendo, for example, has perfected this with Nintendo Direct, its series of pre-recorded, hyped in advance, and tightly controlled marketing events, which made E3 redundant. And then going back to the article at hand that was released today, you have the same exact quote. I mean, at least she said that she was quoting herself, but this brings up another problem, how a lot of like this media is copy and paste jobs. What I do like about this article, it's at the very end, she says, look, E3 is over. No number of world premieres brought to you by Jeff Keighley can capture the fever dream quality the event had at its best and brightest, which is true, because these events, even the video gaming awards, whatever that is, I didn't even watch any of this stuff, because eventually it's just going to be clipped and then showcased on YouTube. If it's on YouTube, I mean, it's important, right? But the immediate event and watching it live, it no longer captures me like it used to when this thing was like really, really big. To finish this off, I also want to say that these big events have been nothing more than overhyped, overly produced, like ridden with celebrities, which like get them off the last nerve. And it kind of started with the bullshotting of Killzone 2. Remember when they premiered at E3 their trailer, and the final gameplay was nothing like the actual trailer. And what we're watching is what we were watching. We didn't know it at the time because the term hasn't been invented yet, but then we know it as bullshotting. And that's what this is. It's just a whole bunch of like overly produced, like not in-game trailers. And at the end of the day, it's all going to come down to what the consumer spends, what they spend their time on. And the video game industry has completely changed from when E3 started. But, now we see the end of an era and the industry maturing in a sense, and people really know what they want. And everything is just so immediate and so fast paced that these companies or these organizations can no longer keep up. And that's why we see the games microtransactioned to hell, and the recent early access game that was shut down earlier this week, the makers of the day before. Like, gamers are becoming really savvy, really smart. Information is flying at the waistline, and you can no longer fool the majority. Well, you can, but like there is a growing resistance of information within the consumer world. and they're starting to see through a lot of this bullshit. But like I said, it's kind of a bitter end that this is all coming to an end. But I think brighter days are ahead of us. And at the end of the day, the consumers win. Information is so fast, like I said before. And we'll see what happens in the world of gaming. See you guys on the next one.